students in the lab, but our lab is mostly student run. We have a couple of grad students who work in our lab, 2 grad students, and 1 professor who sort of oversees the entire lab, Dr. Dorcas. And the rest of us are all undergraduates, so most of our lab members do original research, and we do have a couple of ongoing projects that the lab has been running for a lot of years. One of the things that we do that's really cool is there's an ephemeral wetland down here called Cowan's Ford. And so every year, I think for maybe the past 15 years, our lab has been going out and collecting spotted salamanders. We'll bring these spotted salamanders and we'll tag them with fluorescent dye and release them back into Cowan's Ford, the same place we found them. And so every year we've been doing this to sort of keep an eye on the salamander population and learn more about these animals. So that's an example of ongoing research here. Another one we have is down at Kiowa Island in South Carolina, and we do research on diamondback terrapins, which are these really cool turtles that you'll see here. Maybe not so much in North Carolina because they're pretty endangered, but definitely down in South Carolina. And our lab goes down there and tags these animals to do population biology research. Hands off, we don't want to touch their necks, we don't want to agitate them. So, in here in our lab is where we keep all of our animals. If you'll notice, we have a lot of just random supplies. This is for all the research that we do. So we do a lot of trapping and tagging for population research, so that's what a lot of these supplies are for. That's why you see all of these supplies here in the back. And mostly, to start with, we keep all of our animals in, they don't live in exactly anything like what they would live in the wild, but we try to make sure they're comfortable, they have enough space. So these are our frogs. Here we keep snakes and everything, and behind you are where we keep our turtles. And over there is the home of our alligator. And really this is just sort of where all the research happens, and this is where all our students do work. So I call a walking, hopping frog, and I'll bring him around now, and I'll talk a little about him, but remember, feel free to ask me any questions. I kind of have dry skin. Interesting fact, though, is that all amphibians are kind of characterized by having this really cool, moist, permeable skin that really is it's interesting because they can kind of breathe through it. So a lot of amphibians actually are lungless. There's a whole species of salamanders that are entirely lungless, and they're the most plentiful salamanders here on Earth. So there's about maybe 450 species of salamanders. In particular, have really interesting metamorphs because a lot of them have external gills, which is kind of cool. So they have these really big feathery projections sticking out, and then as they grow older, particularly in mole salamanders, they will sort of absorb these gills and get their lungs. So these guys are interesting because they actually do have lungs. You can tell they're a little bit fatter. So they're not as skinny as those first salamanders that we saw, so they're going to need lungs. They're going to need more air. It's going to be hard for them to get oxygen flowing through their body without lungs to push the process along. And then, after spending some amount of time in water as larvae, or metamorphs, they will come back on land and spend the rest of their life on land. One cool thing about a lot of species of salamanders is that they will go back to the same pond they were born in to breed again. So these salamanders have sometimes been documented walking like 2 or 3 or 4 miles on their tiny little legs and walking all the way back to the ancestral ponds where they were born. So it's kind of cool in one sense that A, they can walk that far, B, that they know their way back. Animal homing in direction is always a really interesting thing to study. And these guys are one of the interesting ones because you can tell, I think it's females have whiter stripes in marbled salamanders and males have grayer stripes, I think. And most of the time, all amphibians are carnivorous. Some larvae are herbivorous, but there's a lot of salamander larvae that will eat other larvae. So it's kind of interesting to think about. Here we have 2 species of mole salamanders that I just showed you, the spotted salamander and the marbled salamander, and they like to lay their eggs in the same places, but they'll come in at different times and lay their eggs. And sometimes larvae of one species will eat larvae of the other species. So there's a lot of contention between these species. So they do have to be careful. One of the reasons they like to lay so many eggs is because it's not really guaranteed that many of those salamanders will make it to adulthood. So that's why, like fish, they lay a ton of eggs just to make sure that 1 or 2 make it all the way to adulthood. Yes, ma'am?
What is a newt?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So within salamanders, there's lots of different families. We have like the endostomatids, the plecodontids, and then we have Salamander, which are the newts. And newts, okay, so all salamanders are not newts, but all newts are salamanders. Does that make sense? We all got that? So newts are a particular type of salamander. Just like we have our longless salamanders, we have newts. And newts are characterized by a really interesting life history. So like we talked about how most salamanders like to start out in the water and go to land. Newts are interesting in that they lay their eggs in water, and then they have like larvae, but then they have a juvenile stage that we call the ect, and that ect lives entirely on land. That's where you've heard about red efts, those little poisonous red newts. Those are red efts. That's the juvenile stage of the red-spotted newt. And so it'll stay on land for a couple of years, and then they'll go back to the water, and then as adults, they're fully aquatic. So that's the interesting difference there, is that they have just a different life history. And for the most part, they tend to be more poisonous than most species. For example, there's the California newt in Tarica. It's all the way on the other side of the country. But they're one of the most poisonous animals. If you just touch one and then you like lick your finger afterwards, you'll die. So they're tough to handle, but they produce a really potent toxin, unlike any of the salamanders that we see here. So newts are pretty interesting. Gross. But this guy is Cheerio. He's our box turtle. And we have a really interesting box turtle program here at Davidson. So we ask people to, if they find box turtles near their house, bring them into the lab, and we'll mark them, and then we ask you to release them in exactly the same spot where you found them. So one of the reasons why we ask you to release them in the exact same spot is the box turtles. I mean, all animals can bite for the most part, but I don't think they'll bite you. They're shells. So turtles have these, they have what are kind of like these really bony dermal plates. They'll eat anything that fits in their mouth. This guy pretty much, he'll eat anything. They'll even eat like roadkill sometimes. What do we think? Yes, sir, I'm agreeing.
They have no legs.
No legs, that's a big one. You in the back, what do you think?
Snakes have like pits on their
Yeah.
face.
And that's actually here. This snake that I'm going to bring out is a king snake. And someone talked about king snakes earlier. So why do we call them king snakes? Any guesses? Yes, sir, what do you think?
Because they eat really poisonous snakes.
Yeah. So one quick distinction. Snakes are what we call venomous animals because they transmit their toxins into you via biting. Poisonous animals. What do we think? Do we think snakes have bones?
Yes.
Yes, they do. So snakes just a lot of ribs. Exactly. So snakes, just like humans, are vertebrates. So they have a spinal cord like us. And they're kind of all loosey-goosey like this, but they do still have bones. And like someone said, one finger at a time. One finger. There we go. They do have bones, just like snakes eat. What do we think? Yes, ma'am.
Some snakes only eat like twice a year. Like, can they eat a lot of stuff at once and then they put like last like that?
Yeah. So snakes don't need to eat as often as us. I just said the prey. This guy that I'm bringing out now is a eastern rat snake, a black rat snake, and he's a black rat snake, sorry. And these are one of the biggest snakes that you'll find here in North Carolina. I guess they get a run for their money from rattlers, but this guy is really big.
Why do you keep them in the bag?
So we keep them in these snake bags, I think mostly for ease of transport, and also just because I think it's like a more comfortable environment for them. Oh my gosh, she's getting out. I think it's just a more comfort because they can climb trees, which is kind of cool. So they'll use those rough scales on their bellies to climb up trees, and that's how they can get into birds' nests, that's how they can get into bird houses to eat other animals.
Like birds and insects.
Yeah, well, he probably doesn't eat insects. Insects might be a little small for him, but they like to eat birds a lot, and especially eggs. Yes, sir.
They shed their skin.
They shed their skin, exactly. So when we grow, our skin grows with us, right? When you get a little bit taller, your skin's going to get a little bit bigger to accommodate all that space that you grew, right? That doesn't happen for snakes. So as snakes get bigger, their skin sort of stays the same. So what they have to do is grow a new layer of skin underneath and shed the older layer on top, and that process is what we call shedding or molting in snakes. And basically what they do is snakes even have scales over their eyes, it's called a brill, and they'll even shed that scale. So basically their whole body will just sort of, you'll see their old skin get kind of rough and dry, and then basically they'll kind of rub their head on something sharp and just slither their way. Her name's Gladys, and she's very I want to say she might be about a year old now. I'm not sure. I was abroad last semester, so I don't know if this is a new alligator or if it's the old one. But I'm going to bring this girl around. So what do we notice about her that makes her different from a big alligator? We'll bring her around and notice that she doesn't really look anything like an adult alligator. What defense does she have? She's really small. Her stripes camouflage her a little bit, but she doesn't really have sharp claws yet. She doesn't have big teeth to defend herself. And she doesn't really have that hard bony skin you see on adult alligators. She hasn't really developed that yet. So the way that she protects herself is actually through her mom. For the most part, we don't think about reptiles or amphibians as being good mothers, right? For the most part, they'll just lay their eggs and leave them. But alligators are actually really good mothers. They'll spend a long time taking care of their kids. Sometimes alligators will stay with their babies for up to 3 years.